Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be installing the front cover here. So have a front cover and we have the front cover gasket and we have a new front seal with wear ring. Now you need a special tool to install the front seal and install the wear ring that goes on the crank here. And you can see here that the crank has some abrasion to it, so we need to make sure we clean this off, and we'll be using our retaining compound to install this and make sure that we do this properly. So first order of business is going to be, we are going to be putting our cover on here and getting it torqued down to spec. So to put this cover on, we have already previously cleaned all of the holes out and made sure that they were nice and clean. And we have wiped off the surface here and removed any of the old gasket or old gasket material. Now we do not need any sealant on here. It is an O-ring seal, so we shouldn't have any issues with sealing. However, we need to get the old seal out of the low pressure oil pump cover and get that all installed. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to put the front cover on here, as well as install a new main seal and a new crank wear ring on your 6-liter Powerstroke. So we need to clean all this off of here before we start this process. So we're just going to take a little bristle brush here and clean it up. You can see it takes that right off of there. You want to make sure that this is nice and clean and free of any contaminants. So we're going to go ahead around and clean this whole thing up and then give it a good wipe again and make sure that it's nice and clean. So you can see we got this cleaned up here. So we're going to have to rotate the crank over to get to the rest of it. So we're just going to get this all cleaned up here and then wipe this all back down. So we've gotten all of the old finish off of this. So we're just going to give it a good cleaning because we want that retaining compound that we're going to use here in a little bit to adhere properly. And you can see the amount of dirt that came off of here. So we want to make sure that this is nice and clean. Now you can see that there's a groove in this here. So I'm not sure where the seal sits, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be on that groove here. So that groove is why we install the wear ring and why we want to make sure that this is nice and clean, because you want to make sure that that retaining compound has a good chance to stick. So we're also going to clean up our little dowels here. There's one down here as well. And just give this one quick wipe again to make sure that it's clean. Make sure that there's no grime on here. So we've gotten our surface all cleaned off. We can go ahead and install our gasket now. So the gasket has the alignment dowels. So we have a dowel at the bottom and a dowel in the middle here, and that lines that all up. So the only thing that I'm not crazy about is you can see with our gasket here that as we push in on this, it pushes through the gasket. Now, if you feel like that's going to protrude a little bit, you can razor blade that off. However, I think we're just going to leave it and it'll compress down, because all that is the rubber sealing surface here between the bed plate and the block. So that's those rubber gaskets that are protruding out. So there is a possibility that we could, possibly just cut that off a little bit, and that might do us better anyway, just to razor blade that off, because they are protruding a good bit, and we do have the RTV sealant in there as well. So, we can peel that a little bit out of there and make sure that we don't have any issues with this sealing. So that's the only thing I'm not crazy about with this whole setup here, is we have a mixture of O-rings and RTV here and no real place for it to go. So once you compress this gasket down, I feel like that may be a source for a leak, because there's nowhere for this to protrude into the front cover. So we need to maybe razor blade that down a little bit so it's a little bit more flat, not protruding. So I think we're going to razor blade those down a little bit and then get to installing this cover. And hopefully this won't give us any issues because we do have that RTV sealant in with those long O-rings on the bed plate. So I have a razor blade here. We're just going to trim this down a little bit. Probably should have grabbed a sharper razor. So we're not taking a whole lot off of there, just trying to take that point off. So now if we were to take our gasket and place it back on here, so we didn't take a whole lot off, but it doesn't protrude nearly as bad. It will still cause a good seal here, but it will compress enough to seal in. I just didn't like how much of that was actually sticking out. So now that I've gotten the O-ring all dirty here, we'll just wipe that back off. And now we can go ahead and put our cover on. So cover has been cleaned for the most part. There's a little bit of crud here that didn't really want to come off on the back side of this. However, it's not going to hinder anything because it's above our gasket. So basically we just take this guy and slide it on here. And it will align with our dowels. We'll just put a few bolts in here just to make sure that it stays. So now we can go ahead and start putting all the bolts into this cover and get it torqued down. So we've got all of our bolts started. So we're going to go ahead, get them wound in, and we'll start in the middle and kind of work our way out. There is no torque sequence for these, so it's a matter of just put it together. So now these are all wound in. We're going to torque these all down to 18 foot-pounds. So we've gotten all these torqued, and now we can go ahead and double check them, and then we can start putting our low pressure oil pump in. So this is where the fun is going to begin here. So now these have all been double checked and torqued. We know that this cover is pushed on at the same force here because we are using an O-ring gasket here. We don't want to over compress that gasket and cause a failure. Now our next step is going to be putting our low pressure oil pump in here along with our cover. Now before we do that, I need to get the old seal out of the low pressure oil pump cover. So we have our new seal here with a wear ring, and we have our old seal here that needs to come out. So these will go on as a unit. So I'm going to get this guy out of here and then get everything put in here and then get the water pump put on, and hopefully we can start getting somewhere with this engine. So we've got the cover here in the vise, and it's set up so that it'll sit here on the flanges and we just have a little bit of pressure on it. We don't want to go too crazy with this, and we just kind of want to tap this seal out of here, which is going to be a little bit harder than it says. So we're going to go ahead and So you can see we were pushing on it there and it hasn't really moved. So I'm trying to be gentle with this cover because I don't want to break it. And out the cover comes, the seal there. So now that we have the seal out, we're going to go ahead, clean this up. You can see a little bit of grime in here, but we want to make sure you don't damage this cover when you're doing this. So you want to make sure it doesn't get broken or cracked. So we're going to wipe this out and get this nice and clean, and then we'll get our new seal put on after we get everything reinstalled. Now, a lot of guys, before they put the low pressure oil pump in, will actually take the pump here, generator, whatever you want to call it, put it together, pack it full of grease. Now, we're not going to do that because I have other ways that I do this, but I am going to put a little bit of lubricant, now this is assembly lube, and just put it in here. Now I'll have to wipe the crank off again where we're going to be putting that wear ring on, but that's fine. Basically all I'm trying to do is give this pump lubrication when we first put it in. Now there is no forward back to these like there would be on a 7.3. So just a little bit of lubrication. Now we did clean these off and wipe them, and slides in there perfectly. Now that's what we want to see. If you have problems getting this pump in, then you need to loosen this cover, put the pump in, and then retorque the cover back down. So if you run into problems where you are having fitment issues with this pump, then you need to make sure that the timing cover has been loosened and that it will slide in there freely. And you can see that we have the movement here in this pump, which is what we want. There is no forward backward to this. So at this point now, we're going to wipe off our surface here again, wipe off our surface here for our crank ring, and we're going to be installing our cover here. Now, this cover is directional, it only goes one way, and we can wipe the wear ring area off with this installed. The only thing I am going to do here is make sure I spray the front of this a little bit here, and I will re-wipe the timing cover and wipe off the end of the crank there. And we need to make sure that we put our O-ring seal in here. So this seal is directional. It will only fit one way. So make sure when you're putting this together that it is installed the correct way. And as always, do not run your finger around, push down in. So we have a new gasket installed here. So the only thing we need to do now is wipe off the surface, apply a little bit of anti-seize to these roll pins here, and we can go ahead and install the generator cover or the pump cover here to the front. And we're not going to go crazy with these roll pins, just a little bit, and make sure that we get it on the pin and nothing else. Now, if you wish, you can put anti-seize on your bolts here as well. I don't know if we're going to do that just yet. And then line this up to make sure that it lines up correctly with your roll pins, and just kind of press it on here. Now we have our bolts that we're going to install. So these get installed to 72 inch-pounds. And that is why I did not put anti-seize on these bolts, because they are installed to such a low torque. We do not want to have these backing out at all. So there was no specification for Loctite or anything on these. The bolts were clean when they came out. So I assume that that is all we're going to put on there. However, I'm going to do a little bit more research into that, and if it does change, I will insert it into the video. But this does only go on one way. So now we get to the fun part of installing our wear ring and our new seal in the front here. So we will be using this fancy dancy tool, and we have our new seal here with our wear ring, and we will be using a green retaining compound. Specifically, I think we're going to be using a 680 Loctite. So we are going to apply some of the Loctite to the wear ring and then install it into the crank here. So this is a very simple process, but it's very simple to screw up also. So we want to make sure that we do this properly. So we have our installer tool here. Now it comes supplied with 2 mounting bolts. So we'll take this guy apart here. So we have a nut, we have a thrust bearing, we have our pusher, and we have our alignment tool. So what you do is with this alignment tool is it goes on the crank. There is a dowel hole for the dowel here, and it will line up like so. You basically just thread the bolts in, and don't gotta go crazy with these. They just need to be snug. So that is snug on there, and it will not protrude out past the crank. And this should slide effectively in here without an issue. But we want to put our retaining compound on here, but what we're going to do is we're going to put the retaining compound on the actual crank itself and not on the wear sleeve. Because if we put it on the wear sleeve, it's just going to rub itself off onto our mount here as we slide it on. So we take our retaining compound here and we'll place it on the crank. And we don't need to install a whole lot of that. Just you want a line all the way around. Then we will take our tool here, get our seal pushed in there, and our wear ring is started. And this will align the wear ring and also install the seal at the same time. So we're going to wind this on here. Now, there's no good way to hold this crank. So if you have a second person, they can hold the back of the crank from spinning. However, this really shouldn't spin the crank. It's not going to take a huge amount of force to put this on. And we're just going to wind the nut in until it stops. And when it stops, that is whenever we have full engagement on our seal here, and then also on our wear ring. Okay, so we got snug here. We don't need to go crazy with this. Back off the nut. You can go ahead and remove your installer tool. So nut, thrust bearing, your spacer, and then your mount device. And now we have our seal at the proper depth, and we also have our wear ring mounted in the proper space and at the proper depth, and it has been installed with the bearing retaining compound. So now that this is on here, it will not work its way off and will be installed until we take it back off. So you need a special puller for these seals and wear rings. Not necessarily the seal, because like you saw me drive this one out, but the wear ring will have a puller. They also make those. So this is the actual installer tool. So the part number for this is an ST107, and that's what we use to put this on. So a lot of guys will tell you you can just drive them on with whatever. However, it really does make a difference as to where that wear ring sits, because your harmonic balancer also sits on this crank. So you don't need to be interfering with it as well. So with this installed, we can go ahead and install our water pump here. And once we get the water pump on, we'll go ahead and put the harmonic balancer back on, and we will be technically complete with this front cover. So now that we've gotten everything installed down here, we have our seal in, our wear ring, our front cover installed, the generator cover installed, our O-rings, everything's good down here, all torqued down. So we're going to put the water pump in. Now, we don't have any abnormal wear in the water pump cavity here. It's very common, or I don't know if I want to use the word common, but it happens. You know, an impeller explodes or whatever causes you problems here and eats the front timing cover or sends crap through the cooling system. So you can use whatever water pump you want here. We're going to be using a diesel site water pump. Diesel site has a pretty good reputation for stuff. This one has a metal impeller. A lot of guys will tell you don't use a metal impeller because it'll eat your front cover when it fails. And then you have guys that say don't use a plastic impeller because it explodes and sends stuff through your cooling system. So it's a 50-50 shot on what you want to use and, you know, what you want to replace or whatever. Generally, most automotive manufacturers use a metal impeller here. So we chose the diesel site one because diesel site has a half decent reputation. So I'm hoping that this will last as long as I'm hoping. So we have a diesel site water pump. They give you the O-ring here. So the O-ring goes on the water pump, and just like that. And because this is a captured O-ring, we will be installing a lubricant on it so it sits down into its boss happily. Now, we did not apply a lubricant to this one because it is a compression O-ring and not a captured O-ring, where it won't be trying to force into a boss like this one will be. So once again, use the silicone lubricant and just basically put it all around the O-ring here, just to make sure that it's lubricated. Make sure that it slides down into its little home there. So this is the only gasket that you're going to be using for this water pump. And it is indexed with the bolts. So we'll put it in here. It should be a snug fit, and line up your bolts and install them. So generally I use anti-seize with this stuff. However, I think I'm going to negate using anti-seize with the dissimilar metals. And the only reason, see, water pump fell here. So now I got to pull this back out because it pulled the O-ring off. So the O-ring came off. So you got to make sure that stays on there. So if you end up pulling the water pump back out, or it falls out on you while you're installing it, it's a good way to pinch your gasket, which is no good. So I'm going to take this bolt and wind it all the way in here. But anyway, as I was saying, I'm not going to be putting anti-seize on these. Generally I do, but because we are doing a low torque spec, these are 17 foot-pounds, I'm not too concerned about them getting seized in here so much. So far, they haven't caused any issues with this as it is. So I'm just going to go ahead, wind these guys in here, torque these down to 17 foot-pounds in a crisscross pattern, and hopefully we don't have any issues with this. We had no issues in the past, so we shouldn't have any issues now. So there's our water pump installed. Give it a couple spins, make sure there's no funky noises, make sure it spins nice and free. It'll obviously have a little bit of a restriction there because it is brand new and there's no lubricant in there with coolant. So we are good there. And now we can go ahead and install our harmonic balancer. So we're going to put the harmonic balancer on here, and I'm going to clean this little bit of a pin up here. It's got a little bit of corrosion on it. Put a little bit of anti-seize on this pin, and we're going to use new bolts to install this. We're not using the ARP bolts. However, new Ford bolts are one-time use only, but they're cheaper than an ARP bolt, and I really don't think you need an ARP bolt here. How many times are you going to be taking your harmonic balancer on and off? But obviously, it makes sense for somebody who's going to be doing that a lot, but we hopefully are not. So I'm going to clean this little pin up, put a little anti-seize on it, get the harmonic balancer put on, and hopefully that'll be the completion of the front cover here, and we can move on to bigger and better things. So we're going to clean this little pin up here. Now, I didn't go crazy with that. Didn't want to go crazy with that because we don't want to take too much of that material off. And we're just going to put a little dab of anti-seize on that just to help facilitate that not seizing up so it comes right off easier. Obviously, we put this on and it lines up with that pin. Give it a little bit of a wiggle there. Make sure that it's on so that it doesn't fall off. And we're going to put our new bolts in here. Now, these are the OEM bolts. Part numbers right there. So these are actually the same bolts that are in the other side of the crank for the spacer that's you're not supposed to remove. So we're just going to get these threaded in here. And for some reason, depends on who you ask, these are either torque to yield or not torque to yield. It doesn't make any sense to me. But crisscross pattern here, putting these in. And now we have to torque them to 50 foot-pounds and then 90 degrees. So these aren't specified as a torque to yield, but you torque them like a torque to yield. So there's a torque to 50 foot-pounds, and I'm going to show you a little trick here. So if you don't have a rotational angle finder, what you can do is take one of these little things here, these magnetic digital angle finders. Now you have to hold the crank spacer to get your 90 degrees. So what you can do is set this up. So I'm fighting with the water pump at the moment here. So as we rotate around here, we're going to lose angle and then gain angle, okay? Now, we can zero this out like that and rotate until we get to 90 degrees. So there's multiple ways that you can do this. Now, this is just your simple angle finder here. And this is probably how I'm going to end up doing this because this is going to be a lot more simple than me buying another fixture to put on here. So I can actually zero this out. And as you can see here, it's a 0. And now I have to hold the crank as I go to 90 degrees. Now to do that, I have a bar back here with bolts in the crank here, and they should stay there, and it's wedged up against the stand here. So basically all this needs to do is hold that crankshaft from turning while I get my 90 degrees up here. So we're going to see how this is going to work. So we're at 89.5. So we got our 90 degrees on that one. We're going to do across here. Re-0. So we'll have to off and then back on. And we're at 0 again. Go ahead and get our 90 again. So we went across, we move over. Re-0 again. And then across. Re-0 again. So you can see how we use the angle finder to get the 90 degrees of rotation there. I got to 89.7. I mean, this digital readout is going to be a lot closer than anything else. Even the spinny gauges that they give you to add on there. But those aren't easy to come by. The digital gauge is a little bit easier to come by. And then we obviously had our bar back here, which did wonders. So that held our crank from turning there. So now we have our harmonic balancer installed and torqued to spec. And we can make sure that this is going to spin if we wanted to. It's going to be tight right now because I had it all bound up with the compression stroke. So everything needs to be installed here. We still have to do a thermostat, which I'll be installing here in a little while, but there's a lot more stuff to install on this timing cover that will end up getting installed as we move forward here. So I'm not going to cover every little thing here, mainly just the stuff that's very important, harmonic balancer, water pump, and stuff like that. So here is your front cover. I randomly call it a timing cover because generally your timing cover is in the front of an engine. I'm also of 7.3 lineage, so I'm used to saying timing cover. So I apologize if I've done that throughout the video. But this is a front cover on a 6-liter. They call it a front cover module. So the torque specs have all been listed throughout the video for all the items in the front here. So hopefully this will help you guys out working on your 6-liter. So thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate the views. I appreciate the subscriptions, everything like that. Trying to keep this channel moving. So hopefully you're enjoying the 6-liter content. And hopefully we'll have some other 7.3 content for you in the near future. So thanks for watching, guys, and we'll catch you on the next one.